Hello, I'm Dr. Ron England, and I'm going to talk a little bit about authentication, membership, roles, and Windows identity in the .NET environment here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you first what the page that I created looks like, and then we're going to come back and we're going to actually look at it, how we do this. So I'm going to go ahead and start this project up, and here is the page. Okay, so I have information about the current user. And notice here I've got my current Windows login. That's actually what I'm logged into my machine as. Nothing here, I'm not logged in, so you can see that I don't actually have anything. So let's go ahead and log in, and we'll come back to this page. I'm going to go ahead and log in with Google. Okay, so I'm going to use my other service to log in. I've saved the information about the Google login. You can see this from previous lectures. And this should go ahead and log me in. So we wait for it. This is an extension to the base Windows form that you have in .NET with Visual Studio 2012, and I have this ability to create local logins and also use the Windows login. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the same page that I was before, which was user information, and now you can actually see a lot of this stuff is filled in. So my context properties, I got a name, that's my Google. Authentication type is forms. I am authenticated. I'm not in the role test role. Test role is actually a role, and we're going to look a little bit about role management. And here's some information about the membership properties. I don't have any comments. There's my application name, which is set in my web.config. So one thing that I can do here is I can create a new role, and remember that test role there. So let's create a new role. Test role. I'm going to create the role. Okay, it's going to come back to here, and I've now created a test role. I'll reload this, resend, and it takes a second again. This time it actually ran into an exception here, which, if you notice here, the exception is that the user is already in test role. So what I didn't do is I didn't check to see if that role should be actually deleted before I actually created a new one. And I added this user to the role, but I was already in the role. So I'm actually going to stop right there. We're going to start looking at the code at this point. And this is where we get to have a little bit of fun with this. So the page that you saw there has a few things that you saw. First one was this label. This label that showed my Windows login. That's the login that I had to my machine, which actually authenticates on a remotely. And to do that, I use the Windows identity object, and I use the get current static method, and I bring back the name. So that text is what the text that you saw, which was my Windows login. So that was one of them. For the one of those things that you saw, and I can pull this up at the same time since I'm not actually going to edit these. And when I pull it up, you can see there's that part, current Windows login. So now I have a literal, and I use the literal because I just wanted to put everything into one single area here. A literal is basically a box that I can put literal HTML text, and you can see it. So here in my literal, I set the text equal to the name, and now I'm using another object, basically instantiated HTTP context, which is the context of the page, which has a property user, which has a property identity, which has a property name. And if you look at that, that is the current name of the user. I'm logged in as ron.england@gmail.com. Okay, and that brings that back. The authentication type, well, as you get familiar with doing authentication, you'll notice that Windows Forms is one of the types, and that's there. Okay, is authenticated. Okay, well, that should be true because I am authenticated. And the other one is enroll test role. Well, I was in the test role. You actually should have seen that from the error previously said that I was already in the test role. And if we come back over to here, you'll see that I am enroll test role. So that call there is enroll context.user.isEnroll test role will return back a true. Say now that is looking at the context. Okay. Now, if I am authenticated in the context, I have some other ways to look at the properties, And I'm going to do this through the membership, static membership thing here. So I'm going to create a membership user that is membership.getUser. So I'm going to use the membership object, use the static method getUser, return back a membership user by the name of user. Okay, should all have that. That's pretty straightforward. And I'm going to look at the values there. So let's bring this back over again. Okay, I'm going to scroll it down so you can see them. Application name, comment, creation, email is approved, is online, last activity date. So you can see there's a number of properties here. And these are all properties of the membership user, the current membership user that I got by using membership.getUser, using that static method. And one of them being user.username. But you can see that there's other properties that you have access to when you're using this. Now, a few of them I actually convert like to string. So user.creationDate.toString, that allows me to come back over here and look at specifically the creation date of when that user is created, and I can look at things like last activity date, last login date. Those all are things that are kept track of automatically using the membership. Now, one of the things that I did here, and I'm going to have to stop the debugging to do this because I want to show you one thing, is I do have this ability to create roles, and I did this creating of roles by just simply having a text box that I put that role in, test role, where I then create roles. So in this case, if the role exists, if it doesn't exist, then I use the create role and I add that new role name and I add the user to role, okay, and then I set the text box to be an empty string, and then I also can delete it. In this case, I get the role name, then I check to see if it exists, and if it does exist, I remove the user from the role, I delete the role, and then I set the text box to be empty. Now, before you can do this, there are a few things that you do need. There's one thing you definitely need to do. I have to go to the web.config file here, and I'm going to have to go over to my role management, which is in the web config. Okay, and let's see, I have to set role manager. Well, I have a default provider, but now, and this is the information about the default role provider, but I have to set the enabled equal to true. So I can't actually create, delete, and work with roles until I have the enabled equal to true for the role manager. So now I actually have enabled role management. One of the beauties of role management is that I can create roles for individual users and use them just like you would think that you use roles, and give access to forms or elements on a form or objects on a form by simply testing to see if that current user is in that specific role. So it gives you a lot of granularity of what you can do with user management. Now, there is one other thing that we should look at here. I looked at the web config, and you saw that you need to enable the role management. Okay. The other thing that I'll look at here is before you can use some of these things, you have to have the correct using. So if you're planning on using the membership objects and actually doing access through the membership, you do need to have system.web.security in as the namespace that you're going to access. And if you're going to use the Windows identity, which really only works on Windows systems that they specifically log into, then you use system.security.principal. I simply put that in there so that you could see that you have that ability to actually get the Windows identity while you're at it too. So with what you've got here, the ability to create users, which you've seen in previous lectures, and now the ability to look at specific information about users, the ability to check to see if users are in roles, to see if the users are actually authenticated and logged into the system, okay, you now have this ability to provide a high level of granularity in your security system and be able to do a lot of security with your web pages. So hopefully this gets you started with using the membership objects, if you need to use the Windows identity, and the context object that is an actual HTTP context object, but the built-in context object for that specific page. Good programming. I hope that this was very useful to getting you started in using the built-in Windows user management systems. Thanks.